All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mike, and you have now arrived at my train of thought. It's also time to once again ask the question, where do we go from here? Today we're going to visit two of the United States' greatest destination cities. We're talking about Las Vegas, and we're talking about Chicago. One that you really probably wouldn't want to go to in the wintertime, and one that you really might not want to go to in the summertime. But if you reverse the cities, you'd probably love to go to both of them. We're going to go to Chicago first, either way. Let's talk about the Bears. You remember this time last season when, really for a lot of the offseason, a lot of people heard from Bears fans like, oh, Chicago's back. Justin Fields is going to take that MVP surge. Some people even say he can win MVP. That DJ Moore was going to handle business now that he got out of Carolina. And after Carolina got absolutely finessed for the first overall pick. And how Chicago as a team were going to make some strides and make some moves and do some things. Chase Claypool as a good number 2 receiver and Darnell Mooney as a 3. Things like that. And then Aaron Rodgers, the guy who has tormented and tortured the Bears for a decade and a half and had owned Chicago for that time period, and there was really nothing that the Bears could say about it because he knew it was an accurate statement. Then the season starts, and ironically, it's against the Packers. And then we came to find out that it really wasn't Aaron Rodgers this whole time that owned Chicago. Turns out it was the Packers at large. Green Bay grand opened and grand closed the Bears seasons with L's handed to the Bears, and I think we came to realize that Tom Grossi was right about this. Anyway, the Bears season started really badly. September for Chicago was as bad for the Bears as it was for the Cubs, as both teams crumbled like graham crackers. The Bears didn't win in September at all, and in fact didn't get their first win until the Thursday night game with the Commanders, who were also pretty terrible. They did beat the Panthers, which made Chicago's pick all that much better, and things at large really didn't get going until, I would say, probably halfway through. But by then, the damage was done and their season was over. To be fair to Chicago, they did play really well against the Lions twice. They probably should have beat them twice. They choked away the first game and dominated the second one. For Detroit, I don't know what the deal is with that loss, but it happened. It is what it is. They also should have beaten the Browns, but that's a Darnell Mooney dropped Hail Mary that cost them there. Anyway, Chicago season was a dud. And though they got to 7-10, it didn't feel like 7-10. Maybe because the second half felt way better than the first. And maybe because the Bears, we thought, were actually going to do something productive. They really didn't. Yet again, they went another year without a 4,000-yard passer. Justin Fields didn't even get the 3K. To be fair to him, he missed a month worth of games. He was still their best running back, or I guess lead rusher, you could say. He ran for 657 yards, which is still 40-plus more than Khalil Herbert. And he also played one more game than Herbert did. DJ Moore, I think, was the one offensive Bear that you could honestly say had a really good year. He was worth the trade and more. 1,300-plus yards. He had 8 touchdowns. He had 200 of those yards and a few of those touchdowns against the Commanders. But DJ Moore had a really, really good year overall. Cole Kmet's become a very good tight end. He had 700-plus yards and 6 touchdowns on his own. So those guys really got it done. That's 14 of the 19 passing touchdowns, by the way, for the Bears. Darnell Mooney had a very disappointing season. I am very alarmed that Mooney didn't ball out a little bit better than he had last year, but maybe that's because the quarterback situation was no bueno. Justin Fields still hasn't evolved as a passer, still a good runner, but has not evolved as a passer at all. That is a very alarming concern. To be fair to Chicago, other than DJ Moore and Cole Kmet, the defense actually had some really good standout talent. They made 2 big moves in the offseason. First, TJ Edwards, who led the team in tackles. He had 155 of them. He was really good. He also had 2.5 sacks, and he also had 3 NOs. He had 3 NOs, not 4. We'll get to the linebacker who had 4 in a few seconds. But he was really good, TJ Edwards. He came over from the Eagles and played a very good inside linebacker. Terrell Edmunds also coming over in free agency. He came from the Bills. He was excellent too. 112 tackles. He had 4 in-os. He did have a pick 6 as well. He didn't get any sacks, but he was a very good player in his own right. You had Jaquan Brisker, who was drafted by the Bears. He actually played really well. He had 105 tackles. He really has come into his own as one of the better young safeties in the game. I like what Jaquan Brisker's doing. I think he could get even better and get into the upper echelon of free safeties in the game in short order. But the big move they made during the season, I think it really set them up for the future. The Montez Sweat trade was a really good deal for Chicago. They only gave him up for a second-round pick and immediately signed him. Think of it as kind of the bizarro Roquan Smith deal, where they traded him. Baltimore immediately signs Roquan Smith to a $100 million deal, and he instantly changes the face of that defense. I think that's kind of what happened here with Chicago. They didn't really have too much bite to them when it came to their pass rushing ability. Why do I say this? Sweat only played 9 games in Chicago and still led the team in sacks with 6. Their defense got better once he got in that lineup, and pairing him with another edge rusher, I'd imagine, would be a big-time idea and a big-time move, and I hope that's a play that Chicago truly pursues. I'll get to their cap room in a little bit about that. Their big and probably best player on their defense, I would say, was Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson was spectacular this past season, and he picked a really good time to do that because he's going to be looking to get dollars in the coming offseason. I'll get to that in a little bit. Jalen Johnson had 4 NOs, and all around was a lockdown corner. Your wide receiver against him was generally going to be absent from the production standpoint of games when it came to Jalen Johnson. He led the team, tied with the team leading NOs with 4. Edmonds also had 4, as I mentioned, and Tyreek Stevenson, who is another cornerback, also had 4 NOs. To the Bears' credit, this defense got far better, like I said, with Montez Sweat in it. How so? Only once did they give up 30-plus points after the Sweat trade. It was to the Lions, and even then, 2 of those touchdowns came within the last 5 minutes of that particular game that got Detroit to 31. The second time they played, a couple weeks later, they only gave up 13. You see the point now that I'm making. Chicago's free agency outlook is actually not too bad. First, they decided to release Eddie Jackson, and it felt like he had been in Chicago for years. He'd become one of the best ball hawks in the game, and I think could latch on to a veteran contending style team. I think he'd be a very productive piece still. Cody Whitehair, who was a guard for them for a while, he too is gone. And I think, like Eddie Jackson, if he goes to a contending team or a team that really needs a guard, I think Whitehair could still play someone. Chicago also made a trade with getting Ryan Bates to help their situation out. Bates has been a starter in this league for Buffalo, and they will probably have him as at the very least, third tackle or maybe even a starting tackle for Chicago. They actually tried to acquire him in 2022, but Buffalo matched the qualifying offer that Chicago had made him. More on that when I get to the draft picks. Anyway, other free agents of note for Chicago. Yannick Ngakoue, I think, could be a third edge rusher for another team, or a starting edge rusher depending on the team in question. He too is a free agent. I do like Darnell Mooney. I think Mooney is a very good number 2 receiver, if not a number 3 receiver on a really good passing attack. He's a free agent and can seek work elsewhere. Robert Tonyan is a guy who I think is a good player. It just doesn't seem like the fit worked in Chicago. He could go get work elsewhere. And then their biggest free agent is their best defensive player from the entirety of last season, and that's Jalen Johnson, who had a spectacular year like I mentioned. I think Jalen Johnson is going to get a whole lot of money in the cornerback market, and obviously in this day and age where you need cornerbacks that can go get the ball and or lock down a team's number 1 receiver, you need a guy like Jalen Johnson. He's going to get paid. He's going to get paid a lot of dollars. But those dollars could still be from Chicago. Let's examine why. The Bears are number 4 in the league in terms of cap room with $76.5 million. So naturally, Chicago is going to be able to make a move in free agency or 2 or plenty more because they're just that nice when it comes to their financial situations. They also have to make a move in the draft. They are currently on the clock. Not because of their own doing, but because the Panthers crumbled like graham crackers. They have the first overall pick for the second straight year. Will they try to trade it again? Considering the prize for getting the first overall pick, I'd advise against it. Caleb Williams, former Heisman Trophy winner and incredibly talented quarterback out of USC, is the prize for having the first overall pick this year. And in theory, the Bears would draft Caleb to be their franchise quarterback and do what no Bears QB had ever done, which is throw for 4,000 yards in a season, which is amazing to think about, considering Chicago's the oldest franchise in the game. He could be the guy to lift Chicago out of the doldrums, if you will, at the quarterback position. And then trade Justin Fields to, say, maybe an Atlanta or a Pittsburgh or someone who needs a quarterback and probably re-up. They kind of have to, because after that first overall pick, they don't have too many other ones. They had the 9th overall pick for the second straight year. They had it last year before trading it to the Eagles. I'll get to that pick in a second. They have their round 3 pick, which is in 75, their own round 4 pick, and then the aforementioned Eagles pick that they got while Philly took Jalen Carter at pick 122. They don't have their round 2 because it came in the Montez Sweat deal, and then obviously 5, 6, and 7 they don't have. But with the first overall pick, they could get a king's ransom for Caleb Williams if they want to keep Justin Fields, or they could decide to re-up with the 9th overall pick and get more stuff back there. Chicago's got plenty of options. Chicago's got plenty of decisions to make. Chicago also has to deal with a new monster in Green Bay and Jordan Love, and current monster in Detroit, and then whatever Minnesota may do. But those are for other videos for other days. The next stop on this train of thought will take us to Las Vegas. A lot of good things are happening there. The Golden Knights are the defending Stanley Cup champions. The Las Vegas Aces are the 2-time defending WNBA champions. The Oakland Athletics are eventually, one would like to think, going to follow the Raiders to Las Vegas and try to see if they can make things happen in that baseball market, or make a baseball market happen, if you will. But what about the Raiders themselves? Well, it's a mixed bag, I would argue. The quarterback situation was not great. Aiden O'Connell was at least serviceable, but I think it became established fairly early. He doesn't seem like a franchise type of dude. He played the last 11 games after Jimmy G got benched, and so he was alright. You could tell he was still only going to be kind of serviceable. I think that's the best way to describe Aiden O'Connell. To be fair to him, he had 3 NOs in the Dolphins game and 4 other ones otherwise. At least there's that. But again, he doesn't seem like he's going to be a franchise type of cat. We'll see what the Raiders can do about this. I'll talk about their resources in a little bit. Jimmy G was an experiment for Josh McDaniels, and it turned out that it really did not work out. Not to Josh McDaniels, for that matter. His experiment did not work either, and it looked like the Raiders really were directionless when McDaniels was the head coach. It felt like after Detroit pounded the Raiders into the ground on Monday Night Football, and then Davis was fired on the flight back to Las Vegas, a switch seemed like it was flipped. I would know this because I produced a couple of the Raider games after Josh McDaniels got fired, and the first of which was against the Giants, who, yes, were a dead team walking, but with Antonio Pierce at the helm, we didn't know what we were expecting from the Raiders. Turns out the Raiders put up a beatdown against the Giants and then promptly beat the Jets, so they're one of the few teams in this past season to beat both New York teams. And they just looked better. Their defense had some bite to it. They had some fight to them. They put up a fight against Miami. They put up a couple fights against Kansas City, beating them once. I can't explain the 3-0 performance against Minnesota, but then I also can't explain the 63 they put up against the Chargers and causing Brandon Staley's doom. The Raiders look like a far better team than they were before Josh McDaniels, after they fired him. They just look so much better. The only constant in last season is that both Antonio Pierce and Josh McDaniels got a win against the Broncos. At least there's that. Anyway, Denver's caught enough strays over the last 24 hours. Let's talk about the Raiders other than Antonio Pierce. Josh Jacobs followed up a rushing title with a modest season. Nothing really special, but he was alright. He missed a couple games, but Jacobs is still a very serviceable back, obviously. He didn't get to 1,000 yards, which was a little surprising, but again, part of that's because he missed 4 games. He did have 6 scores and looked like every bit the bruising running back that he's always been. Zaire White was also solid in his stead. Good change of pace back in his case. He only had 1 score, but I think part of that is because Jacobs got a lot of the attention and a lot of the carries. He doubled White in terms of carries, even though he missed 4 games. So, something to think about. Davante Adams, and maybe that's part of this is because Derek Carr wasn't there and the connection was so great between Adams and Carr, had a, I guess, subpar season by his standards, where he only had 1,144 yards and 8 scores. So, Adams is still a very good receiver, still elite of the elite. I think it's just the QB play that kind of brought his stats down. Even though, to be fair, Jacoby Myers' stats went up, and actually he looked really good his first year out in New England. He had 800 yards on his own and 8 scores to Ty Adams for the team lead. No one else really did anything in terms of receivers, but at the very least, I do like Mike Mayer. I think Mike Mayer is going to be a pretty good tight end in this league. Pretty solid rookie year. He did miss a few games, but I'd like to see his numbers go up a little bit more. Mike Mayer's got a real future at tight end. He really does. This defense is obviously led by Max Crosby. Crosby had another spectacular season and is firmly entrenched as one of the best pass rushers in the game. 14.5 sacks. He had 90 tackles as well. He is a dominant defensive player that you have to double team pretty much every play, which means Tyree Wilson's going to have to step his game up in year 2. Year 1, he was 3.5 sacks. He wasn't great. He did play all 17 games, at least there's that, but I would like to see more production from him. Malcolm Kuntz was second on the team in sacks with 8. A very underrated season. Yes, I'd like to see more from Wilson, but an underrated year for Kuntz. And then there's Jack Jones, who came from New England after he was kind of sort of discarded when the Patriots regained J.C. Jackson, or reacquired J.C. Jackson, I should say, in a trade for the Chargers, as basically L.A. tried to salary dump him onto the Patriots. Jack Jones promptly had 2 pick sixes, and to be honest, the one that wasn't against Pat Mahomes is the one that is the more spectacular of. The Mahomes one was nice. It was on Christmas. It made people angry in Kansas City. It also probably allowed Taylor Swift to come up with more songs. But the one against the Chargers that effectively ended the scoring and Brandon Staley's tenure as coach is the one that is the hang in Louvre, where he basically reads the play from Easton Stick like a book, snatches it, overruns the ball, and then one hand picks it, and then goes to the crib untouched. It was the lasting image of a humiliating evening for the Chargers and a fun evening for the Raiders. It is kind of wild to think about both those NOs not coming on a Sunday. One came on a Monday, one came on a Thursday. Weird to think about. Anyway, they do have one of the better kickers in the game in Daniel Carlson, who had another good year. Not the great year that he had in 23, but another good one. At least there's that as well. The Raiders' free agency situation's actually not terrible either. They do have 2 very notable free agents. Austin Hooper, who you may remember from the Super Bowl year that Atlanta had, and the things that happened in that game. He is a free agent, and I think is still a very good, capable starting tight end. I don't know how much longer he'll be in Las Vegas because Mike Mayer is there, and it looks like he's going to be the guy to take care of business at that position. But Hooper, I think, can still play some really good tight end ball. Then there's Josh Jacobs, whom it took a while to get his situation right last offseason. He finally got the franchise tag, and now he's a free agent once again. He's obviously the former rushing champion and a really good running back, and he will bring a lot of thunder to a particular team. Will that particular team be the one he's played his entire career in with Las Vegas? The Raiders' cap situation is also pretty good. They are 10th most in the league, at least they have the 10th most cap room, at $47.8 million. They obviously have to decide on Jacobs. They obviously have to decide on Hooper and a few other free agents. The offensive line was underrated. They actually gave up the 11th, least amount of sacks, which For a quarterback, and they probably need one, I think that's a good thing to have, especially. The Raiders also have draft picks. They got a few. They have 9 in total. 5 of the 9 are round 6 through later, and they come from other teams. I'll get to them in a minute. They have their own picks in the first 5 rounds, including the 13th overall. In a quarterback, and really for that matter, offensive-heavy draft, the Raiders could absolutely stand to draft the QB of the future or draft a wide receiver to pair with Adams and put Jacoby Myers in the slot, which would actually make him a very dangerous slot receiver. Myers also threw a touchdown pass. I didn't mention that earlier, but he showed himself to be a very good and capable player outside of New England. The Raiders picks that aren't their own, rounds 6 and 7. They have 1 in round 6 coming from the Chiefs, and they have 3 in round 7 within a 6-pick span. 1 from the Patriots, 1 from the Titans, 1 from the Vikings. And the Raiders, hopefully for their sake, can use the quantity of those picks to get quality players. They certainly need them. It's nice to see that the Raiders learn from their previous mistakes. Some of you may remember the Rich Bisaccia situation after John Gruden's emails blew up, and they had to pivot away from Gruden to put Bisaccia in place to be the interim head coach. And they actually had stability with Bisaccia. They somehow made the playoffs. Well, and part of that's thanks to Brandon Staley, but they somehow made the playoffs of Rich Bisaccia. And then foolishly let him go to the Packers instead of letting him stay as the head coach and keeping that culture together. Then promptly they hired Josh McDaniels, and nobody liked the decision. We all laughed at the Raiders for it. The Chiefs did a snow globe play. It was hilarious under his watch, and the Raiders went nowhere fast. Then they were able to pivot, or at least they rightfully pivoted away from McDaniels to Antonio Pierce, and now all of a sudden the Raiders have a culture, and the Raiders have some promise, and they have some physicality to them. If they could just get the QB situation right, the Raiders, I think, are in really good shape to do something. Only time will tell if they do it, though. And with that, you have now reached the final stop on my train of thought. The next train is going to start in Minneapolis with the Vikings, ironically a team that beat both of these squads on the road. Next stop after that will take me from Minneapolis to Indianapolis, and I'll talk about the Colts and how they went from being an awful team in 2022 to a team that's kind of reviving in 2023 and beyond. The teams who are the authors of the biggest collapse and biggest comeback in NFL history will also have one question to answer. Where do they go from here?